Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and welcome to part 2.5 of my 7th video game generation retrospective or recap series. If you're watching this at the time it came out, yay, welcome, a new console-ish to talk about. And if you're watching this in the original playlist, isn't it weird how we went to 4K and then back? I know, it's crazy. Okay, so here's the thing. Before we get started with this console and starting to talk about it, it's important to know that despite the fact that this is called the 7th Gen Recap, and I placed it in there myself, and we just acknowledged it, this is totally not a 7th generation video game console. It completely fails to meet that definition. The only reason we're talking about it in that context is just the time in which it came out. Generations are complicated things. They're partially technology, they're partially competition, and they're partially time frame. This does not satisfy that definition. It's actually the type of console I would generally never really talk about. Like I would never do videos on clone consoles. Like all digital ones like that have thrown to the ash heap of history, like the Ouya or the OnLive, stuff like that. I don't talk about because they're irrelevant. This one is just a little bit unique, enough for a video. But this totally does not count as a console in the 7th generation. I'm just going to say it. This is just a glitch. So let's talk about this console's history a bit, and then maybe you'll see why I'm saying that. So this console is, of course, the Mattel HyperScan. Just taking a look at it, you'll see it's kind of a strange design. It's, at least at first, it opens up like a wallet, and it's got this sensor pad thing, which obviously has a point. And then on the front, you have 2 controller ports as well as a power button. On the back, you have a USB port, which apparently was never used. A power supply, which is not unique, but apparently is not a common voltage for this type of cable. At least that's what I was told. I was told to use the original power supply. And then it has composite video out that is hardwired to the console, which is just always a horrible idea. And then the composite itself presents another problem that we'll discuss later, but that's about it. It's got a disk drive, obviously. It uses CD-ROMs, not DVD-ROMs, mind you, CD-ROMs. I actually verified these discs myself. You can rip them into a bin and queue format using like, CDR-Win on Windows XP. Like this is just a CD technology. And again, that's the thing though. This launched in 2006. October, I think October 26, 2006. This actually launched like 3 weeks before the Nintendo Wii and the PlayStation 3. So the Xbox 360 was already out when this thing came into existence. And so basically, here's its story. Mattel, who is best known as a toy company who made things like Barbie and so on, at some point in the late 90s, early aughts, was looking at popular trends for what kids were into. And the 2 most exciting things that were producing sales was video games and card games. Now, video games, Mattel had actually played a role in. Like, they released the Intellivision way back in, like, the late 70s. And I've even done a video on it. But to call this their next-gen attempt at a console is really an unfair statement. It's more like a technicality. Oh, right, Mattel, who made a real competitive console at one point in time, also much later made a piece of crap for kids. Like, this is not a competitive console at all. But yes, technically Mattel made both of them. So they made that, and at the same time they were thinking about like card games, because card games were super popular. Now, I was actually of the exact right age range, not for this, but for card games in general. They had started to pick up in the late 90s. Everybody was playing Pokemon stuff with cards and everything. I missed all that. Like, I never got it. It did not interest me whatsoever. So I just never pursued that trend. But that trend continued with things like Yu-Gi-Oh cards and, like everybody had trading cards. Like, I do remember that. Like, you could buy trading card packs of like any random piece of pop culture for a phase there. So Mattel had the idea, hey, what if we combine the 2? And you can actually go back and look at their original ad for this thing. It's a trailer. You can see it on YouTube in its full glory. It's literally just 2 guys talking about, wouldn't it be cool if we like fuse that together, and they make like a really bad joke out of it. And it's just like, Okay, so that was it. It was shamelessly that. It was just take two trends and glue them together. Now, the problem, though, is the execution. Because actually, to be completely honest, on paper, not a terrible idea for the time. It would never have lasted. It would never have worked out. We would not still be using it. But at the time, the concept actually had some merit, had they done it correctly. The problem was twofold. One, the cards themselves, I mean, I'm no expert on card games, but these cards do not function as individual items for a game. Like, you can't just sit down and play with these, as far as I know. And then from a video game perspective, whoa, the technology is archaic. People like to point at this thing and say, oh, it's a 32-bit console. It's like a little PlayStation that came out in 2006. No, calling it a PlayStation would be rather generous, I think. This thing is more, it's at least 2 generations behind what was about to come out, if not almost 3. You know, not fully 3 in the technical sense, but this thing's hardware, honestly, much more comparable to something like the 3DO. The reason people say PlayStation is because that's the one most people know. But honestly, I don't think that this thing could do what the PS1 was capable of at its peak. I think you're looking, again, we don't really know because nobody dug into the hardware, but to me this really feels more like it's on the 3DO level, which is still a 5th gen console. It's just one that was separated by like 2 years of development. I feel like this thing would have been impressive had it been released in like 1994. The problem is it was released in 2006. Again, if you're a kid at that point in time, Xbox 360 has been out for a year. You're literally 2 or 3 weeks away from the Nintendo Wii and the PlayStation 3. Why would you ever want this? And the only thing I can think of is you had crappy parents if this is what you ended up with, because they went into a store and they saw, oh, hey, Billy likes those game things. Well, that game thing costs like $300, and that game thing's like $200. That game thing is like $600. This game thing is only $70. I love you, Billy, but not that much. $70 for Billy. That's what we're doing here. That's like the only context in which I can think of anybody intentionally buying this for a child. It's just that they were like being cheap parents, to be completely real with you. So, look, I've done many videos on this channel on obscure consoles and bad consoles, like admittedly. Things like the Casio Loopy and the Bandai Pladia and whatever. And I always try to get into their mindset of the time and try to say like, well, it's not that bad because... But this one is like, no, it's that bad. I don't like to be that guy, because I hate when people review consoles and they're like, this is the worst thing ever. It's like, no, it's not the worst thing ever. But this one's pretty bad. This is like, it failed at almost every single possible goal. The only like real positive thing I have to say about it is that it did at least kind of kick off a trend that did prove to be kind of successful for a brief time, which was the whole concept of toys to life. Like, eventually we would see Skylanders was successful, Disney Infinity was successful, and then Amiibos were successful. But, you know, the thing is, all of them have fallen off except for Amiibos. And then Ubisoft tried with Starlink, you know, tried Toys to Life, and then it burned out. So, like, Toys to Life is now a completely dead concept. It's just something that doesn't really work because both sides of it are limiting. If you're trying to play this with the cards, you can't really do it. If you want to play this with the video games, you can't really do it, because that's the other thing, is they tied them together in the wrong way. Like, what you should think of is, this is physical DLC. You need these cards for content in the game, which at first would be like, okay, if I could play the game and then get a better experience if I had the cards, that would be one thing. But the games do not work without these cards. That's the Achilles heel. Well, it's one of many, but that's like the first Achilles heel. So a kid is going to lose these things. So if you pop in a game, like, all right, I'll show you in a minute. We got an X-Men game. You boot that up, and you try to pick a character. You can't. You actually require the cards in order to be able to pick even a basic character and start the game. And so if you lost it, the game's junk at that point. You can't do anything about it. So if I was them, I would have told them, like, look, there's a lot of things you need to do differently. First of all, this console is ridiculously underpowered for the era in which you're releasing it. Like, this is pathetic. So that's not going to play. Second, the underpowered aspect wouldn't even... I would actually give them a pass on that in the way you might give Nintendo a pass for at least the last few generation cycles for being like a full generation behind because they deliver strong game content on top of it. This didn't do that. They did not only did they fail to deliver strong game content, but they failed to deliver even like basic game content or basic common sense. I mean, I'm sure you've heard it before if you've looked into this thing at all. The load times on this machine are horrific. Like, absolutely horrific. I'm actually going to boot it up here and let you see it. So what we're going to show you first is the X-Men game. I have it connected to this monitor. Now, this is real. This monitor is a portable monitor from a company called Lepo or Lipo. I kid you not, they contacted me and we talked and they sent me this monitor for free just to show you guys the Mattel HyperScan. This is a real thing that happened, so thank you to Lepo. I'll put a link in the description if you guys want to check it out. It's a cool portable monitor. It supports 720p and 1080p input. You know, it's a nice little thing. All right, so here's the funny thing. The Mattel HyperScan only supports composite output, as I mentioned before. Obviously, a modern digital monitor is not going to understand that. So what I had to do, and you can't see it, but there's a lot of wizardry back here. I connected it to the RetroTink 2X Pro, which line doubles it to 480p, smooths it out a bit, and then passes it through HDMI. But this thing does not support 480p, so then I had to send it to an M Classic, which then upscales it to 1080p. And now you can actually see it. Yeah, and then there's the beginning of that. The load times, man. And then, of course, you got this controller. This controller is, again, I'm not one of those guys who like still getting controller going, that's the worst controller ever. This isn't the worst controller ever, but this is really bad. Like, this is like by somebody who really didn't understand video games at all, and they're like, yeah, kids won't care, put whatever. That's how this whole console feels to me, is that it's just some guy who didn't understand video games and didn't understand card games, and just said, I don't get them, but they're both the popular thing. Put them together and your budget is like 10% of what you actually need to do this properly. And that out came the HyperScan. It's still loading. Like, we're still loading here. But anyway, yeah, so, okay, all right. I'll show you a little bit of this. Quick fight, and then we go back to loading again. This version actually is I have two controllers for this thing. Oh, wow, okay. All right, so here's the thing. Now, at this point, you have your controller and it wants you to scan a character, right? So this is what I'm saying. Without the cards, can't do anything. Can't play the game. There's nothing you can do. So you absolutely need these cards. Now, fortunately, I have the 6 that came with it, so we can at least kind of show you this. So I've got Wolverine, and then a couple other random... Lady Deathstrike is a character, and that's it. I only have those 2. So I'm going to try and use Wolverine. And as you can see, not the most reliable thing. Okay, it worked. See the problem? If I'm a little kid, I'm an adult and I'm kind of impatient with this. Imagine being a little kid and just trying to play this thing and it just like usually doesn't work. This is a common problem with HyperScans, is the damn card reader almost never works properly. Like, isn't that the most basic feature? And now we go back to loading. Again, and I'm trying to find positive things to say about it, but imagine being a little kid and this is what you ended up with. Look how long it has taken for us to actually get into the game and do anything. Not good. Anyway, it does have 2 controller ports. I actually do have a second controller. This is the single controller bundle. There were actually 2 bundles. This was the first one, and I imagine the second controller bundle was basically just Mattel being like, take the rest of our stock, put it together, throw it out there for much less money, and let's get rid of it. This thing only was around for about a year. It was discontinued extremely quickly. In its lifespan, officially it had 5 releases ever. I have 3 of them. There were 2 releases that were canceled. One was a Nickelodeon game, and the other was an Avatar: The Last Airbender game. However, some people claim that that some copies of that got out. Do I care enough to really go and try and find one? Absolutely not. So I can't really play from this angle. But yeah, this is a terrible, terrible fighting game. The idea that they decided this was supposed to be the pack-in is just kind of like horrific to me. But I'll tell you this right now, with the setup I've got going, this game, the HyperScan in general, has never looked prettier. You are welcome, Internet. I'll show you some more gameplay in a little bit, too, of a different game. But, yeah, I'm sure I'm going to lose. Like, I can't even tell if am I even hitting him? I can't. Oh, my, I actually won. Well, good for me. I won the game. But, yeah, that's the... Oh, well, I just won the first match. But you get it. But, yes, that would be the HyperScan in a nutshell there. Now, the other games I have that I can show you real quick here, well, I can't really. I can show you one of them. There's a wrestling game called Interstellar Wrestling League, or IWL. Now, this game is a perfect example of what is wrong with this concept. So, like, the disc is fine. I play the game. I even have a couple of the cards. One of them actually is a wrestler character. And, let me see if, the load times, I'm sure, are not going to pan out in my favor, but I'll try to boot this up, as fast as possible so that maybe, just maybe, you can see this in real time. So let me put away the X-Men thing here. Actually, well, we'll give it a second while it's loading that up. But yeah, the pack-in one, every single version of this console came with the X-Men game and came with the 6 X-Men cards, and it just, you'll probably agree with me in a bit, but I am just stunned that that's the game that they selected as their pack-in. And it's also cool, at least they had Marvel on board. Of course, this is pre-MCU, but, at least they had some major people behind him. There's also a Ben 10 game, which was, a franchise very much after my time. But, yeah, and then I forget the other one. But there's really, there's not much to it. There is, or was at least briefly, a homebrew scene for this thing. Because people thought, oh, the hardware is not actually all that awful. You can maybe get it due to like emulation or something. But then it was like, who cares? So that kind of died off pretty quick. It also, I mentioned before, it has this USB port on the back that apparently was never used for anything. Although some people claim that's part of what makes the homebrew scene kind of more viable. Although I've tried to test it and see if it generated any sort of power. And maybe mine's just dead. I don't know. But I couldn't get it to work. And as we're still waiting for this thing to load, the one thing I do want to say, as I want to give a shout out here to a guy named Peter from Virginia. That is my experience with this console, is Peter from Virginia. Earlier this year, like right as the pandemic was beginning, or last year if you're watching this in 2021, I had just done the first episode into the year when the pandemic had struck, and I was sent a package by Peter, and he had sent me this. And I showed it to you guys in that episode of Playload. I even had a different portable monitor at the time, and I set that all up, and I showed it to you guys, and you saw my experience live. And that was the only time I ever used it. So, because honestly, it's such a pain to set it up, and it's not really worth the experience. But I'm sorry, there's just no like great stories of, oh, I remember when I was a kid and we sat around playing the HyperScan. If you were the kid playing the HyperScan, I'm genuinely curious if you're watching this or if you ended up being a serial killer. Like, just let me know. But so we go ahead and hit tour mode. So it's so far so good. So you're thinking like, okay, all right. Now it's like, oh, can you scan your character card? Okay, I've got a character card. So let's just give that a second. If it'll read, but sometimes it just refuses. Now, I don't know if I mentioned it before, but this thing did not use NFC technology like the Amiibos do or whatever. Okay, so it read the card, right? Good. So you're like, okay, good, we're making progress here. Yeah, I'm gonna totally pick him because it's the only character I've got. And then it's like, okay, fight that guy. And now it's like, you have to put a mod card. And I'm like, okay, well, I have one. Now let's see what happens. But this uses RFID, which is an older, incorrect card type. These are the only 2 cards I've got. Thus, can't do anything with the console. At this point, you now see the flaw. The obvious flaw in just basic usage is, don't have the right cards, game's over, can't keep playing. Now, obviously, they sold like card booster packs and stuff like that. That was supposed to be a big thing that would have kind of kept the cycle going. Because originally, like I said, the console was $70, games were $20, and I think booster packs were only like $5, something like that. So, again, on paper, I can see this actually kind of working for a time, a brief time. As I said, Toys to Life is very much a dead concept now, but it could have kind of worked back then. But honestly, to make this function, you would have had to have far better technology under the hood here. You would have also have had to have the cards had to have been complementary to it. And what I mean by that is not free, but like they would have had to enhance the experience. Think of it as season passes or something like in DLC context. You should still have a core game you can actually play, and then the cards go ahead and you're like, and you see the value of it by adding extra characters or adding whatever. If that's the gimmick you're going for, you have to do it that way. When you do it in such a way that the games are just immediately broken, just because you don't have these like pieces of paper laying around, that's it. It's junk. Now, here is the saddest part of this whole thing to me. So like I said, my experience with it was very limited. In fact, I didn't play it again until prepping for this video. So I sat down and I played the wrestling game, and that's as far as I got, so I figured that one out. I knew the X-Men game like well enough to know like how that was going to play out. But the one I hadn't tried was this game, which was Marvel Heroes. Now, Marvel Heroes, I'm going to show you some footage here, is an actual game. It's actually not that bad. It's not good. It's just like a basic like 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up type of game, but platformer, you know, playing as Captain America, running around and doing stuff. This is actually not awful. I'm not saying this was a system seller. I'm not saying this was a big deal. But I am saying if this had been the pack-in for the console, I think it probably would have done a little better, because I think it would have been a lot more fun for people. Because the other dumb thing they did too is they put in this, I mean, that X-Men game, ignoring how stupid it is that you need the cards, and of course you still do need the cards for Marvel Heroes, don't get me wrong, but the fact that you need the cards, even if you get past that, that is still just a genuinely terrible fighting game. Whereas this is, again, not the greatest game ever, but it at least is playable. And I was actually sitting there kind of enjoying myself very briefly playing it, which is the best review you've ever heard of the Mattel HyperScan. Is I briefly enjoyed it for a minute or so. That's it. And yeah, I mean, honestly, there's not much else to say. This is not a 7th gen console. Its time frame puts it there. But the reason this doesn't count is one part technology, as I said, one part timing, and the other part of generations that's key that nobody really thinks about, but it's very important, is intentions. This was never intended to compete with the Nintendo Wii, the PlayStation 3, and the Xbox 360. This was the kiddie table. This thing was meant to go sit off in a corner and be like, yeah, you guys do your thing. We're just appealing to like little kids. That's the goal. Other consoles would never have done that, like by themselves. And that's what separates this from other weird consoles. Things, again, like I've mentioned, like the Casio Loopy or whatever. Those consoles may have been bad, but they were at least some way either technologically relevant or they attempted to be market relevant. Even if their gimmick was stupid, they at least tried. This didn't. This sat in a corner. And but it's also different from the other gimmick weird consoles, because those, like the Ouya and the OnLive, whatever, those don't really count because they don't use physical media. They're just kind of like little digital Android boxes or whatever. So and like those things like Leapfrogs, those are like, that is closer to what this is, except the Leapfrog is genuinely made for like 0 to 3-year-olds. Maybe not literally, but you know, like it's really a brief range at the beginning. Whereas this tried to appeal somewhat to like the standard definition of a gaming kid, again from the early 90s. Everything about this feels like this was supposed to come out in 1994 and still flop, but that's when it was supposed to come out. If this had come out in 1994, I would have said like, wow, it sucked, but like at least it tried, you know, it was right in there. Like this, I'm serious when I say this feels like some guy said cards are popular, video games are popular, and all he knew about video games is like his son had a Genesis like 10 years or 15 years earlier or whatever, and was just like, yeah, they like it when it has a lot of attitude or tude. Yeah, do that. It's the HyperScan. It's hyper. Which it's not. You've seen how slow the damn thing is. But yeah, I want to thank Peter very much for hooking me up with this so that I could at least show you guys. And I want to give credit because Marvel Heroes is actually not an awful game. Can I recommend this thing on that alone? Absolutely not. This is not worth owning unless you are like me, where you just kind of like to have every console. But even this one, man, like, I'm gonna keep it real with you. If Peter hadn't sent this to me like for free, kind of as a gag, I was never going to pursue this because this is so teetering on the edge of what even constitutes being a real console or not. Like, you can kind of tip it either direction. But since it's here, at the very least, we'll talk about it. But I will say, if you are going to get one for any reason, and there aren't many reasons, do pick up Marvel Heroes. This game is at least playable. And after that, you're pretty much done. There's really nothing else. I mean, I can't try Ben 10, I guess, but Marvel Heroes, it's, you know, it's a game. That's the best, you know, like, I obviously haven't beaten or anything. I would give, like, X-Men, like, a 1 out of 10, maybe a 2 out of 10 at absolute best. I can't even try the wrestling game. This one, maybe a 3 out of 10. Like, that's maybe a 4 if you want to grade it on a curve that it's the HyperScan. But yeah, so that'll pretty much do it. Thank you again to Peter for this. Thank you guys for watching. Thanks again to Lipo for hooking me up with the monitor. I'm not kidding. They hooked me up with this just so you guys can see the HyperScan. So if you're interested, these portable monitors are actually pretty cool, by the way. I actually quite enjoy them. So I'll put a link in the description. Check it out if you want to. Thank you guys. Oh, and I guess I should thank, even though they didn't know they were doing it, thank you to Mike Chi for making the Retro Tink because he made it possible for this to work. And thank you to the guys at Marseille for making the M Classic because they also made it possible for this thing to work. Thank you guys for watching. If you could check out the social media stuff in the description, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Patreon, all that stuff. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all later.